I'm Mike Davis, Senior Director here at Hauser Wirth West Hollywood, and I am so thrilled to welcome you all to Angel Otero's first Los Angeles exhibition here with Hauser Wirth, as well as this talk this evening. Very excited to introduce you to Julie Rodrigues Widholm, the Executive Director of the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. And Julie was an early supporter of Angel's work. She put him in an exhibition entitled Constellations, a group painting exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago. And we are so happy that they can be in conversation again this evening. So without further ado, I give the mic over to Angel and Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
This is a great crowd.
It is.
For you. This is amazing. You have a lot of fans, I can tell, came from near and far. This is super exciting for me to have the opportunity to reunite with Angel. We've kept in touch over the years. I'm now up in the Bay Area, and so to be here on the occasion of your first solo show in Los Angeles is pretty special, since I feel like I was there pretty early on. And we're going to tell you, I guess, a little bit about how we've come to work together and know each other as it relates to Angel's work and how we kind of arrived to this momentous occasion, which I want to congratulate you and applaud you, because I think this is a very special moment for Angel that to me feels like a true culmination of 15, 20 years of work that's come together in an absolutely stunning body of work that is important. There's a reason why museums are collecting your work now. It's really hit its stride, I think. Maybe we start a little bit, for those who don't know you, I know we have a lot of friendly, familiar faces in the crowd, but for those who maybe don't know you as well, could you just talk a little bit about your trajectory from Puerto Rico to Chicago?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Actually, that's a great start. First of all, thank you everyone for being here. I did not expect this nice crowd over here. Thank you to Mike and the team at Los Angeles Hauser Wirth, and to my dear friend Julie. It's very special for me to have this conversation with her. In 2003, I moved from Puerto Rico to Chicago to follow this idea of what it is about becoming an artist and studying art. I did 2 years of undergrad over there in Chicago. I met one of the most wonderful people that I still have in my life around me out there in Chicago and in school. My experience out there as a student is something that I like kind of highlighting, because it was a very transitional time for me to trying to understand who I was as a person in context with who I wanted to be as an artist too. I was trying to understand what was my art about, what was it that I wanted to explore as materials go in painting. And I always have had, obviously, my heart in painting and exploring what I can do and say with painting. But those years for me were very transformative. There was a lot of exploration with materials, which is what took me to the process that I'm quite mostly known for today, using dry oil paint. And around that time, I met Julie, who I was already a big fan because she had participated curatorially in a lot of amazing shows at the MCA. So having her in my studio with her curiosity of meeting me and my work really opened up this conversation about myself, about what was my art about, what was I representing, what I was trying to say, explore.
I want to mention one thing just from those early days when I was visiting you as a student, because I think it sort of relates to your work now, in that you were good at making pretty paintings, a little too good, if you will. And he didn't like that, right? He sort of resisted making paintings that just looked good and they were colorful and just, you had a facility with it. But I also remember at that time asking you, why do you paint? Because you were pretty obsessed with painting.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember you being in your studio like all hours of the night, right? You were just, you couldn't stop.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I was intrigued because, the more I absorbed art history, specifically painting history, the more I realized that all these artists that I admired, and even the ones I didn't necessarily admire as much, they had their own language, their own way of interpreting what painting was for them. So I was just kind of in this very deep digging this hole about trying to see what it meant to me personally in context with them, but different from them too. And about those pretty paintings, it was challenging because I didn't want the paintings to come across as these sort of decorative easily access. This was my own judgment towards my own painting at the moment, of my own critical sense. I wanted to have a bit more of a challenge also, because this is a three-person thing, right? It's me and my art, but then there's the viewer. And I wanted to have a conversation, not just something that is kind of a free giving, a quickly access. But at the same time, within my conversations with you, I started seeing, what kind of the idea of beauty means in painting and in art from also a different perspective in a good way.
Mm-hmm. And that resistance, that kind of chafing at what is, pretty or expected is something that has, in some ways, motivated you throughout your work.
It did. And I think those kind of, when you have that self-critical part, it's good. It can be a little complex too, because that doesn't mean I'm always right or wrong, But it has helped me also understand what is the conversation that I'm having with my work. What is the conversation that I'm going to bring with those works leave the studio? Pictorially, they can become very beautiful, and I do love making something that hopefully looks quite elegant and beautiful in color and form, in narrative, that can make people feel happy. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, I also want to have that kind of, that challenge about not necessarily having all the answers right in front of your face, leaving with some sort of doubt, question about my art or about yourself.
Mm-hmm. And so as you can see here, your material explorations are varied and have been. Mm-hmm. You work in sculpture, painting, if we can call these paintings anymore. You work with paint.
Yeah.
The work also is collage, somewhat sculptural, somewhat related to printmaking. It has all of these facets within its process, but also within the lineage and the conversation that you're having too. So there's a lot of references in your work in terms of the history of certain processes. Where do we even begin? I guess let's start with maybe how you began to move away from painting itself and the oil skin.
I think I knew quite quickly when I was able to find the right subject that I felt confident enough and challenged enough to work with. And that was me, my personal story, my memories of back home. There was, for some reason, I recognized that there was a lot of constant exercise of trying to remember what I left back in Puerto Rico and how it reflects on me in that time in Chicago. So I was all right. I wrote a lot of references about things in the odd house of my grandmother, mostly objects and the furniture, and just kind of a very detailed description of all the things I could remember or vaguely remember. When I had that content or that idea of that content, I was like, well, okay, now how am I going to paint it? Because that was the thing. It was content and form. And I'm like, well, if I paint it traditionally, the content is going to be more of a protagonist than the actual material. But I want both to be as protagonists. And I'm like, well, let me explore in my little studio with different materials, just so when people are in front of the work, they are received with a sort of narrative, but at the same time with a composition of materials that have also their own narrative on itself. And that way there can be that kind of dialogue of the two subjects. That's when I started collaging the dry oil paint, and I was getting a lot of interest and feedback with this process of composing the paintings out of dry oil paint. So during that time, I came across with the process of drying oil paint quickly, using little sheets of glass. And when I reused those glasses, that they were full of dry stain, and I just scraped the paint off that surface again, I was exposed to this perfection of print of the stains that were in the glass. So it was a very aha moment, and it was very organic. And I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. Like, I can kind of work with my painting in a conventional way over this surface of glass, and it can be figurative, it can be abstract, and then I'll cover it, and then I'll scrape it out, and I'll reveal the painting on this distorted kind of state, but at the same time, it's a decollage, it's painting, it's a sculptural, it's a printmaking, it's gonna be a collage. So I felt I was really kind of inviting all these fields, but kind of using painting as a nucleus. which is really where I wanted to stand. And over time, is a process that, not just because of being unique, but it has become my way of almost kind of filtering a lot of the elements that I think about and that I want to work with. And I have said in some sort of times, they almost work like a shield too. Because if I were to paint traditionally into the canvas, the subjects that I want to work with, and just expose it like that, the directness to the subject from the viewer, I can get a little, just a little intimidated by it. And I think the process helps me stop a little bit that directness and think about the work as a narrative, but at the same time as a materialistically, that's what it works.
So all of these still use that process where you're painting
All of the paintings that we have here in the show still do that process.
in reverse on the
In reverse.
plexi.
Yes.
Is
So
it
it's tricky to explain the process here. It will be all day, but
Yeah.
an easy way of explaining it is I have to paint in reverse and then scrape it out and reveal all these layers. That's when we have, what we have here today.
And then are those applied to a canvas?
And then I collage the paint into the canvas.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Let's start with the title of the exhibition.
Yes.
The First Rain in May.
Yeah. The title of the show comes about a long history. In my personal experience, at a young age, my grandmother always told me that I needed to get wet on the first rain in the month of May. And this was because it was going to bring luck to me and to her and to the family. Growing up with this mystical element of something that you don't understand, but you need to believe in, it was at the early ages confusing, strange, weirdo. Over time, it becomes quite beautiful and powerful because it really describes, the culture that I come from. And for this show, I felt that the sensibility that you have of this painting, that you can tell it has a playfulness element, and not playful only because of playing in a reference like this one, but also in the expectations of what we grow up learning what to believe on and how that reflects on who I am today. So I felt it was a playful but also nostalgic way of connecting the show to myself, to my past, and at the same time in Latin American culture.
Let's talk about this painting in particular, Neverland.
Neverland. So here I had decided for a long time I wanted to paint a slide. And some of these decisions don't necessarily come about with a full background understanding of where am I going. And I don't think I know that's actually how I like my creative process to be. I make drawings and I have ideas that I want to visit. So in this case, I had painted this slide and it started from there with the process, scraping it out. And that's why you see all these sort of damages looking on the surface because of the scraping. And then over time, things start hinting me on what to add to the work, to the narrative. And in this case, I was like, well, it's kind of cool, thinking about playfulness, a little kid's pool with water. Water has been something very present in my work for some time now. And I had also separately working a lot of little objects, painted in the same process, but with the intention of, after scraping it, cutting it out and collaging it. So some of these little paper boats and the paper plane are elements that I painted separately and then later collage. So it's very sculptural still, like Julie said earlier, where I take these objects and I start kind of checking around where they should fit, where they seem more curious, and where they have more narrative.
And there are some motifs in this painting that we're sort of seeing throughout these paper boats.
Yeah.
The paper airplanes, the water, a kind of central object within the space. You were talking earlier about sort of theatricality of the composition. Maybe say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and I think it connects to that painting that you put in that show, Exquisite, where it was, like you said, it's this table in this blank space, because it was about the object. It wasn't about, the surrounding. It was the object as a protagonist, the same way, you make a portrait. It was that kind of essence. So I really like that the work can have these very centered compositions of these objects with different types of objects creating that ambiguous narrative in a very theatrical sense. So you see that a lot of them have that dark background. It's kind of a strong spotlight. because I feel like, is to me is very theatrical, and it's almost kind of a staging, a composition of this memory that is at the same time very present in my mind, but when I try to physically compose, it becomes something a little more extensive.
And so are these from actual memories you had? Like, was there a slide in a boat or a chair in a bathtub, or were these things
There was definitely a chair in the bathtub, always, that's for sure. So some of those, yes. Elements like the slide inside the children's pool or the sofa with the swing, of course, those are things that I kind of build up today, right? Very imaginative, and me trying to create something that not necessarily is purely about surrealism, is more about something like a magical realism where you, in the tone they write, you are in this fantastical world, but it almost feel you're in between reality and fantastical. And that kind of balance really, I think it really expresses what I'm interested on when making these.
And do you feel like that's what's tied to memory, is the sort of elusiveness of being able to grasp a fixed memory, which now over time, does it start to evolve into these fictions in some way where you can't quite remember because it's so far gone, and there's a feeling that you remember more than the actual thing that happened?
I think so. I think that what you just said is something that really stands in my mind without necessarily a full answer. I just think I've been exhibiting 15, 16 years, and I've been strongly attached to these references, but although they depart from such a specific time and specific experience in my past, the more time passes in my life, the more I evolve, the more the memory also evolves in its own way. And when you constantly revisit it and try to recompose it again and again and again, not just in painting and writing and any creative process, they just become a mirror also of who you are today in connection with that past. And I like that because it always changes, So at some point I was like, well, everybody's gonna get boring about those couches and the chair in the tub, but I can go away from what feels to me honest because of that. So I have always stick to it because it's really my trampoline to kind of see something different in myself, in the world, etc.
And so then in some ways it becomes about a memory of relationships, of course, people through objects. We remember people through objects. We keep objects, from those that we love, near and dear to us. But I also wonder, is there a melancholy? So I know, because you've worked so much with the past, right? Sort of your personal history and people that you love in your past. There's this Portuguese notion, saudade, which is sort of like a melancholic longing for something that you just can't really grasp. But I don't necessarily get melancholy from your work, but I wonder how you would characterize that kind of reference to the past, unless it is a way for you to engage with yourself.
Now I'm a father. I have an 11-year-old. I don't know if she's here right now, but you'll notice when she arrives because she's crazy. But a lot of the memories I depart from are memories around that same age, when like our memory starts really absorbing all of these, and then we just go our path, holding these over and over again. And I think there's a strong bridge with the fact of being a father, now kind of seeing from afar my daughter absorbing, everything that she has in her surrounding now.
I would like to talk a little bit more about the ceramic pieces. So we see this seesaw that is made of ceramic and metal, as is that beautiful piece on the wall. Can you tell us, for you, what happens differently within this three-dimensional mode of working?
Yeah.
And also, just in general, tell us sort of about these great pieces and how they were made and where they were made.
The sculptures, as you can see in the paintings, I always have had a strong interest in three-dimensional work. Ceramic, in particular, was a material that I was introduced to in Chicago at my end of school, and I was completely ignorant about working with ceramic, and I felt that there was too much rules compared to other forms. But with that said, my thesis, I don't know if you remember, my thesis show was this table that I had with paint, and it had a ceramic. And I felt that I could be able to also expose my ignorance towards the material in a very humane way. And so sometime later in New York, I had a great exhibition where I had mostly sculptures. And the sculpture, the idea was to kind of introduce metal and ceramic together. The metal referencing mostly the gates of the house that I grew up, which is the same pattern that you see here and in the chair in the back, this ornamental kind of heart pattern looking. The first reaction to whoever was helping me at that time that I wanted to put clay and metal together in the kiln was a no. And I just couldn't understand. Like, this is like a microwave. I can just put whatever there and burn it, but it does not work like that. And I still did. I bought my own kiln. Back then, I did these wonderful sculptures that in that time, this is maybe a little over 10 years ago, they were very challenging to me. They were very important because I felt I was taking this rigid material and collapsing it with this material that is supposed to be very, very fragile and that you shouldn't touch because it breaks, and putting them together in this kiln, knowing that the metal is going to get actually weakened through that heat, and then the ceramic is the one that gets stronger in there. So those sculptures back then were really complex, very fragile, very rebellious, very heavy, and they still around in my own personal collection still. But I wanted to revisit that for this exhibition, and I worked with a wonderful group of people in Guadalajara called Cerámica Zurich, who had the courage to give me the permission to put all this crazy stuff in his kiln, in their kiln. And the first thing I wanted to do was take the gate reference of the house, but convert it into something else. So I did the couch shape, and then I wanted to put ceramic. And I flew out there, I worked with all of them, and although they gave me the permission, I think the most beautiful part was having a conversation about why is it that I'm putting the metal, because they kept saying it's gonna break, it's gonna break, it's gonna crack. I'm like, I know, that's part of what I want. I want that gesture, I want that conversation, because the cracks is always perceived like it's broken, and that's it. I wanted to see it from a different perspective, metaphorically. It's nostalgic, it's meaningful, it's as fragile as we are. And through that, I decided to also do this floor piece. I had made a drawing, and I was like, yo, let's do a frame. And then the frame was gonna be fulfilled with clay, and we're gonna fire it. And the true story, it was a straight seesaw, not like this. But we put it wrong in the kiln, and we had a little beautiful accident. The weight of the ceramic pushed the metal down when it was weakened, and they called me freaking out that, they were sorry, it wasn't no one's fault. This is all a communal exploration, because it's not only for me, they're also exploring this, which it made me feel really cool about it. And I said, you know what, put it all together and just let me see it. And when they did, I just felt it was just magnificent, because it fell into the narrative of the show. And I really worked hard to make sure that it was here today. And it was part of the show. But for me, it was very important, apart from the work itself and what it represents, having that conversation later on with them. Why is it that I'm accepting this? Because it wasn't like I said, like, you know what, it works for me, give it. I was like, I want to tell you why it works to me. And these are a lot of individuals that work there that are not necessarily artists or related to art, working class families, that I was able to translate what my creative process means to me in relationship to what I represent and where I come from. And I think that was the most beautiful part of this piece.
Maybe let's move that way.
Yeah.
This is look out your window. That is look out my window. In terms of your source material,
Yeah.
you don't paint from photographs. However, there are photographs
Yes.
from your life, from your childhood, that you do seem to refer to quite directly.
True.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So these windows are directly taken from
These
either...
windows are directly taken from a reference of the windows, same, of the house that I grew up. Obviously, these are things that I revisit in photos and study, and I had the reference to the windows in some paintings as these little windows in a corner, almost trying to convey the viewer of what I'm painting. It's more of an interior space. But as I was looking at more pictures, I was like, wow, this really looks also kind of like a background, and it has this shape of minimalist and the abstract and the composition of these white lines horizontally. I was like, well, this can be kind of my take in some sort of way, not just about the figurative reference or the representational reference, but also for abstraction. So I decided to go ahead on my surface, on the glass, and painted these windows to a human scale size, letting it dry, obviously leaving a couple areas. What it looks like open window is actually, kind of a negative space. So when that first layer dried, I then went and painted this very abstract, mostly composed of a red palette painting that I knew it wasn't gonna come out as much, but that was kind of the purpose. I know it was gonna be revealed through these little openings. And so after finishing the painting and went with the process of scraping the paint out, obviously all these gestures that are gestured completely by chance by the process, I felt that it was balancing those two forms, and it was able for me to take over that kind of reference to abstraction in the show. I located them here because I wanted the space to be activated in the sense that as you enter through the gate that you see in the beginning, or exit the gate to the park, or entering inside the home, the viewer could be here, and this can be perceived as, the back of the house with the windows, and you're peeking to this world, or you are inside the house peeking to the outside world. So there was a strong game of inside and outside, very metaphorically. I put the chair here close also because of adding an accent to that reference.
This is so amazing to see because you have used chairs, both physical, like stuffed chairs.
Yeah.
Did you have a stuffed chair in your MFA show? Or
I did. It was a stuffed chair, and then that table.
next to a painting.
Yeah.
So this sort of domestic furniture has been, again, a motif, part of the vocabulary, artistic vocabulary of your work for a long time. So to walk in today and see this entirely made out of ceramics kind of blew my mind. Musical chair.
Because it was the only one. I wanted to do more, but they took a while. It took a while to do, but I just felt, again, it has the connection with playfulness. At the same time, it's the last chair. I just felt the title added a more playful narrative.
And I should mention, I don't think I did yet, that all of this work was made in the last year and a half.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So it's dated 2024, and it was made in your New York studio or in Puerto Rico?
It was an influence of both.
Okay,
Yes,
in both.
yeah.
Okay.
But yes, going back to Puerto Rico, going back home, has been quite beautiful and at the same time very unique. Just because I've been away so long, and not just as an artist, but as a son, and now as a father. We're there and. See the island just kind of also evolving in many ways, and so much going on. I know is being now in front of it. It's going to be definitely going to be activating the work in many directions for sure.
Now that the canon is expanding, sort of, do you feel that, like, where will you push yourself in your work? Is there something to resist now?
I don't think so. I'm very organic too. I go with the flow. And I'm actually very happy that the island, the artistic practice in the island is having a beautiful spotlight. The great art has always been there for sure. And I have a lot of history from the art in Puerto Rico that has been a huge influence to me, and it still is.
We should maybe
mention
Arnaldo Roche.
Arnaldo Roche has been a huge influence, still is, and so. I think it's something that is definitely gonna make the work evolve, and hopefully in great ways, not just in the subject of paintings, but materialistically, I think so also.
And are there certain artists that you see your work in conversation with now?
I don't know if I can mention one name particularly. There's several here, great French artists, and some that I don't know but I admire, that I like that we can have very. There is conversation there between what we are all our practices, from the personal to identity to everything happening in the world, materials, and it's cool, And I know we all sometimes have the expectation that we have to work towards this fight of originality, And originality, it is important. But it's also beautiful to have a very humble and honest conversation with your peers. And I feel I do, and I feel very proud of it.
That's beautiful. Wait, let's talk about this wall, which is unique and different, and this kind of small scale painting. I don't know if I've ever really seen your work at that scale before.
These smaller paintings, actually, they were really meant to be cutouts for the bigger paintings. But the more they were coming out with this sort of like blurriness and distorted, almost obscure feeling with the dark background, I felt they also work alone as paintings. And so I had collected some of them that I didn't feel that comfortable cutting them out. And I wanted them to be their own protagonists. So I saved them and collaged them. And I thought that, for this show, I could have this sort of composition of these small works together with these two bingo paper boat and bingo paper airplane to have kind of this perception of either young or adult, doesn't matter, just this some sort of collector of these paper toys. I felt the salon style will really highlight in a very informal way that subject.
I read these as very sort of fragile. I mean, if they're paper and they're water, they're sort of disappearing, right? There's moments of solitude. These little boats and planes are very alone in the backdrop.
They do depict that. They do depict that solitude. It's true, and it is fragile because they're supposed to sometimes float in water, and
Amazing year and a half of work that you've created.
I think this was wonderful, and you being here made it even more special. Honestly,
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for
Thank you for
today on my crew. This was great.
Thank you.